Poor girl, still just a secretary, my aunt teased, sipping her tea. The reunion the next day felt as suffocating as ever. The Wilson family's annual gathering was held in my aunt's grand mansion, where a massive crystal chandelier sparkled above, casting light over designer outfits and shallow conversations. Dresses and expensive watches. The air was thick with a mix of pricey perfume and an unmistakable air of superiority that clung to my relatives wherever they went. I lingered in a corner, watching my cousins vie for attention by bragging about their latest accomplishments. My simple black dress, chosen so I'd blend into the background, felt like armor against their judgments. "Olivia," my Aunt Patricia called out, her tone cutting through the chatter. "I almost didn't see you there. Still working as a secretary, dear?" I took a small sip of champagne, carefully hiding my smile. "Administrative assistant, actually," I replied quietly. She raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Still at that little consulting firm? What was it called again, Summit Solutions?" I nodded. My cousin Ethan, fresh from making partner at his father's law firm, couldn't help himself. "Come on, Liv, I could get you a real job, something with actual career potential." I thought about the stack of contracts awaiting my signature back at my real office, not the cover story I maintained. "I'm happy where I am," I said. Aunt Patricia's laugh could cut glass. "Darling, you're wasting your potential. Your cousins are all executives, partners, real business people, and here you are, pushing paper for someone else. If only they knew that someone else was me, the one who built her empire in secret 10 years ago, right in this very house." I remembered those early days, fresh out of business school with an MBA and a groundbreaking idea for restructuring failing companies. I'd spent months perfecting my pitch, convinced that my family's vast network would launch my career. Instead, they all laughed. Uncle Robert had scoffed. "Leave that to the big firms, girl. Join the family business, start in the mailroom, work your way up, like everyone else." And everyone else meant my male cousins, naturally. The Wilson family's definition of success was narrow and controlled. Fortune built by a network of companies, each led by a chosen male heir, while women were expected to marry well or settle for subordinate roles. That night, I made two decisions that changed everything. First, I would build my own company without their help or even their knowledge. Second, I would make them regret every dismissive word they'd ever uttered. Summit Solutions started in a tiny office above a Chinese restaurant. My savings barely covered the rent, but I had something more valuable than money: a deep understanding of how companies work, fail, and most importantly, how to fix them. My first client was a small manufacturing firm on the brink of bankruptcy. Rejected by every major consulting firm in the city, they trusted me. I spent 3 months restructuring their operations, streamlining processes, and negotiating with creditors. 6 months later, they were profitable again. Quietly, word spread among business circles about the mysterious consulting firm that could save dying companies. I handpicked my team, people who shared my vision and discretion, and everyone signed strict NDAs. My name never appeared on public documents. I was simply the CEO. As Summit Solutions grew, I maintained my cover as a low-level employee. I kept that tiny office above the restaurant, even as we expanded into a sleek downtown headquarters. When family members asked about my job, I described mundane administrative tasks, watching their eyes glaze over. This deception wasn't just about pride, it was a strategy. The Wilson family empire was built on snapping up struggling companies at rock-bottom prices. My firm specialized in saving those same companies before they became vulnerable to hostile takeovers, quietly undermining my family's predatory practices while building our own success. Now, 10 years later, Summit Solutions had become one of the most influential consulting firms in the industry, with offices in 12 cities, a client list featuring Fortune 500 companies, and a reputation for turning failing businesses into success stories. None of my smirking relatives had any clue. "More champagne, dear?" Aunt Patricia's voice yanked me back to the present. "Maybe you should stick to water. I imagine your salary doesn't leave much room for expensive tastes." I accepted the champagne with a practiced smile. "Thank you, Aunt Patricia. How's Uncle Robert's new acquisition going? Williams Manufacturing, right?" Her smile faltered slightly. "There have been some complications. Nothing Uncle Robert can't handle," she added. What she didn't know was that those complications were my doing. Williams Manufacturing had been targeted in my uncle's hostile takeover attempt. They reached out to Summit Solutions 3 months ago, desperate for help. Now they were rolling out our restructuring plan, and their stock price was climbing while Uncle Robert's plan crumbled. I overheard someone mention that they'd hired another consulting firm. Cousin Ethan chimed in, probably throwing good money after bad. "Those consultants always promise big but deliver nothing." I forced another smile. Summit Solutions' fee for saving Williams Manufacturing was more than Ethan would earn in 5 years at his father's firm. Oh, which firm, Summit or something? He waved dismissively. Nobody important. Dad says their CEO won't even show his face. Probably some trust fund kid playing at business. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my actual assistant. Emergency meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. with Wilson Ventures representatives about a merger discussion concerning Williams Manufacturing. An urgent response was needed. I read it twice, a dawning realization. They were finally admitting defeat with Williams Manufacturing. After failing to acquire the company, they were now seeking a merger, which required approval from Williams consulting firm my firm. Tomorrow morning, my family would expect to strong-arm their way into a merger, only to find the very secretary they'd dismissed for a decade sitting at the head of the table. Everything all right, dear? Aunt Patricia asked, noticing my expression. I finished my champagne and offered my brightest smile. Perfect, actually. I should head home early for tomorrow's meeting. Oh, taking notes for someone important, something like that. She teased. I was already planning what to wear, something exactly like that. The next morning, I stepped into my private elevator, ascending to Summit Solutions' executive floor. Gone was the simple black dress from the reunion. Today I wore a tailored Chanel suit in deep navy, a power color for a power move. My assistant Maya waited at the elevator doors with a tablet and a knowing smile. The Wilson Ventures team had arrived early. Your uncle seems particularly anxious to meet the Summit CEO, she reported. I checked my reflection in a glass wall. Perfect. Are they in the main conference room? Yes, along with Mr. Harrison from Williams Manufacturing. Maya's eyes lit up. Your cousin. Ethan is there too, apparently. He insisted on handling the legal details himself. I smiled, recalling his condescending offer of a real job just yesterday. Who else is coming from the family? Aunt Patricia came as moral support, even though she isn't officially part of the meeting, and Cousin James is representing Wilson Ventures' finance department, a perfect audience. I glanced at my watch. 8:57 a.m. Have they been served coffee? Aunt Patricia complained about the lack of a server. Maya grinned. I told them the administrative assistant would be in shortly. I almost laughed. For 10 years I played the role of invisible support staff whenever family visited the office. They never really noticed the quiet woman who brought their coffee or took their coats. It was the perfect cover. Give me 2 minutes, I said. Then bring in the contracts. I could hear voices through the heavy conference room doors, the authoritative tone of my uncle, Aunt Patricia's sharp laugh, Ethan's smug commentary. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the doors open. The conversation halted immediately. My uncle sat at one end of the long table, clearly assuming the power position. Ethan and James flanked him in expensive suits that screamed family money, while Aunt Patricia, perched nearby, inspected her manicure with practiced disinterest. Mr. Harrison from Williams Manufacturing sat alone on the opposite side, looking uncomfortable. Finally, Aunt Patricia sighed. We've been waiting for coffee for. She paused and looked at me for the first time. Olivia, what are you wearing, and why aren't you carrying coffee? I walked calmly to the head of the table, taking the seat directly opposite Uncle Robert. I don't serve coffee anymore, Aunt Patricia. In fact, I never really did. What is this? Uncle Robert demanded. Where is the Summit CEO? We were promised a meeting with the actual decision maker. I sat down, relishing the confusion on their faces. I am the CEO of Summit Solutions. I have been since I founded the company 10 years ago. A heavy silence fell. Ethan's mouth moved silently, and James dropped his pen. Aunt Patricia's carefully maintained composure cracked, and Uncle Robert's face reddened as he recovered. This is absurd, you're a secretary. No, I replied calmly. That was just a cover, a very effective one since none of you ever looked past it. You were so convinced I couldn't succeed that you never noticed I already had. At that moment Maya entered with a stack of contracts. She distributed them efficiently and then took her place behind my chair. These documents, I continued, outline the terms under which Summit Solutions will consider approving the merger between Wilson Ventures and Williams Manufacturing. Ethan sputtered. You can't be serious, this is a joke, right? Some kind of elaborate prank. I pulled out my phone and projected Summit's latest financial statements onto the wall screen. Summit Solutions currently manages over $12 billion in client assets. We have a 94% success rate in corporate restructuring, and our approval is required for any major changes to Williams Manufacturing's business structure. I smiled at my stunned relatives. Does that look like a joke to you? I asked. This is impossible. Aunt Patricia whispered. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. That's exactly what you were meant to believe. I said, turning to Mr. Harrison. Would you like to explain to my family why you chose Summit Solutions over Wilson Ventures' original offer? Mr. Harrison straightened in his chair. Summit's reputation is unmatched. When Wilson Ventures attempted their hostile takeover, Summit's restructuring saved our company. We increased profits by 47% after implementing their plan. Cousin James looked like he might faint. The plan that ruined our acquisition attempt, that was you among others, he said. I began listing cases on my fingers. Peterson Electronics, which you tried to acquire last year. Maritime Shipping, where you underbid last quarter. And the Davidson Group, which recovered just before you could buy them out. Leaning forward, I added, for 10 years, I've been quietly undermining your strategies. As my relatives sat in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the image of the dismissed secretary with the powerful CEO before them, I knew the truth was finally undeniable. Every time your company tried a predatory acquisition, Uncle Robert's face would turn an alarming shade of purple. You deliberately sabotaged the family business, he accused. No, I corrected. I built my own business. A company that helped struggling businesses survive instead of tearing them apart for parts. The fact that it messed with your plans? Just karmic bonus. This is ridiculous, Ethan declared, standing up. I'm calling our lawyers. Sit down, Ethan, I said, my voice carrying an authority that made him freeze. You should really read the contracts right in front of you. The very ones your firm spent months trying to secure for this meeting. I watched as understanding slowly dawned on his face. That's right. Your law firm's biggest client this year was me too. Maya stepped forward with another document. This is a summary of Summit's current market position and liquid assets. You'll note that we're now in a position to acquire a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures if we choose. The room erupted. Aunt Patricia was practically hyperventilating, James was frantically checking numbers on his phone, and Ethan slumped back into his chair, looking shell-shocked. This is blackmail, Uncle Robert growled. No, I said quietly. This is business. The kind you taught me I'd never be capable of handling. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. You have until 5 p.m. today to review the merger terms. They're very generous considering our position. If you decline, Summit Solutions will begin purchasing Wilson Ventures stock on the open market tomorrow morning. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Aunt Patricia, about that champagne you so graciously offered me last night. I own the vineyard that produces it. I bought it last year. And that coffee you were so desperate for this morning? That chain too. I smiled sweetly. Turns out my salary did leave room for expensive tastes after all. The door closed behind me, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. In my private office, I finally allowed myself a moment to process what had just happened. 10 years of careful deception, of playing the invisible underachiever, had led to this moment. Maya appeared with a real cup of coffee, my favorite blend from my own coffee chain. Was it worth the wait? I mused, thinking about all those times I'd served coffee in this very office. Every time my family dismissed me, underestimated me, and wrote me off as nothing more than a secretary. Every single second, my phone buzzed with messages from family members who must have heard about the meeting. I silenced it without even glancing at the screen. They'd have plenty of time later to process their new reality. Right now, I had an empire to run, and for the first time in 10 years, I could do it without hiding who I truly was. The next 48 hours were exactly what you'd expect when a family built on power and appearances suddenly finds out they're not at the top of the food chain anymore. Messages began pouring in almost immediately after the meeting. Aunt Patricia, darling, let's discuss this over lunch. You always were my favorite niece. Ethan, come on, Liv, we were just joking around. Family sticks together. James, you can't do this to us, we're blood. I ignored them, focusing instead on the rapid-fire emails from Wilson Ventures board members. They weren't stupid. They could see which way the wind was blowing. By noon, they had scheduled an emergency board meeting for 3 p.m. They had voted to accept Summit's merger terms. Uncle Robert, predictably, didn't go quietly. You've betrayed this family, he roared, barging into my office. Maya moved to intervene, but I waved her off. Let him have his moment, I said calmly, not looking up from my computer. I'd say I learned from this family. Seize power, eliminate competition, never show weakness. You gave me everything except the one thing you thought I lacked, real value. You taught me I'd never be good enough, and that my only role was to support the men in the family. So I built something better by deceiving everyone for a decade. I finally looked up at him. By letting you deceive yourselves, you saw exactly what you expected. A quiet, unambitious woman who knew her place. That was your mistake, not mine. The fight drained out of him. He sank into one of my visitor chairs, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Why reveal yourself now?" he muttered. "You could have kept operating in secret." "Because it's time," I replied, closing my laptop. "Williams Manufacturing isn't the only company you're trying to acquire. There's Thomson Electronics, Maritime Solutions, at least 3 other companies with good people and solid products that just need proper restructuring. I'm tired of watching you destroy them." "It's business," he protested weakly. "No," I said firmly, "it's greed. And it stops now." I handed him a folder. "These are the final merger terms. Summit Solutions will acquire a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures. We'll restructure the company to focus on building businesses up, not tearing them down. You can stay on as a consultant if you accept a new direction. If not, your golden parachute is outlined on page 3. He opened the folder with trembling hands. "You've thought of everything," he murmured. I smiled, though it wasn't warm in the way he might have expected. After he left, Maya brought in a stack of newspapers. Headlines screamed, "Secret CEO revealed. How one woman built a billion-dollar empire in secret. Wilson family shocked by hidden success." My phone buzzed again, this time with a message that actually mattered. My mother, who divorced Uncle Robert's brother years ago and distanced herself from the Wilson family's toxicity, sent just one line. "I always knew you would show them." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. The Wilson Ventures board enthusiastically embraced Summit's new direction. Their stock price jumped 40% after the merger announcement. Companies that had once feared the Wilson name now sought partnerships. The press couldn't get enough of the story. Aunt Patricia tried to spin it as a heartwarming family success story. "We always knew Olivia had potential," she told one reporter. "This just proves that the Wilson spirit of entrepreneurship runs in the blood." I responded by releasing archived video from last year's reunion, where she had spent 20 minutes explaining why I would never amount to anything. The footage went viral. After that, she stopped giving interviews. Ethan attempted damage control in his own way, claiming he'd been in on it all along. Unfortunately for him, too many people had seen his shocked face in that conference room. His law firm's other clients began questioning his judgment, and within a month, he was quietly asked to take a leave of absence. Then James approached me with a business proposal. "Just 2 weeks after the revelation, we could dominate the market together," he suggested over an awkward lunch. "The Wilson Summit Alliance would be unstoppable." "That's not what Summit Solutions is about," I told him. "We don't dominate, we elevate." The real changes came in the quieter moments. The young intern tearfully thanked me for showing her that success doesn't require compromising your principles. Female executives reached out, sharing their own stories of being underestimated. Business schools invited me to speak about building ethical success in a cutthroat world. 3 months after the revelation, I stood on a stage accepting the Business Innovation Award. Looking out at the audience, I saw my mother sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Behind her sat several of my former administrative assistants, women who had helped maintain my cover while building their own careers at Summit. "Success isn't about who has the most power," I told the crowd. "It's about how you use the power you have." For 10 years, I had played a role that made powerful people underestimate me. I could have revealed myself sooner, but I waited until Summit Solutions was strong enough to create real change. The applause was thunderous, but the real satisfaction came later that evening when Maya brought me an interesting piece of news. Uncle Robert had just announced his retirement. His resignation letter even included an unexpected paragraph. "My niece taught me that true business success isn't measured in acquisitions or assets, but in the positive impact we create. I regret that it took losing control of my company to learn this lesson." I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the long game I'd played. 10 years of careful planning, swallowing pride, and playing small had led to this moment. Summit Solutions wasn't just successful. It was changing how business was done. The next family reunion would certainly be interesting. I planned to host it myself in Summit's main conference room, the same room where I'd served coffee countless times while watching and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal who I really was. Maya knocked on my door. "Your 4 p.m. is here, the CEO of Thomson Electronics, the company your uncle was trying to acquire." I smiled. "Show them in, and Maya, bring coffee for everyone, the good stuff from our chain." As I stood to greet my visitors, I caught my reflection in the window. No more hiding, no more playing small. I had built something remarkable, not despite my family's dismissal, but because of it. They had taught me that power doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it appears as a quiet woman in a simple black dress, serving coffee and taking notes while building an empire right under everyone's nose. The tabloids called it revenge. The business papers labeled it strategic genius. But for me, it was simply justice served, one corporate takeover at a time, with a side of perfectly brewed coffee. And somewhere in a small office above a Chinese restaurant, my original desk still sits. A reminder that success doesn't always wear designer labels or demand attention. Sometimes it works quietly, patiently building something extraordinary while the world looks the other way. That's the real secret to success. Not the power you show, but the power you build when no one's watching. 2 of 2.